Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Office of the Chief Scientist Science Seminar Series. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mark Edwards, Senior Science Advisor with the OCS and your host for today. On behalf of the entire OCS team, welcome to our Science Seminar Series and today's Science Seminar, our last for 2022. First, as you may have noticed from the notification at the top of the window, that we are recording today's seminar. If you'd like to ask questions or have comments, you are welcome to put them in the chat at any time. The chat will not be recorded on the video, so please submit your questions there. Recordings from previous seminars are now available on the Alberta Environment and Protected Areas YouTube page, and new recordings will be posted there in the near future. Today, I'm happy to offer the land acknowledgement. I respectfully acknowledge our OCS offices are located on the traditional lands and gathering place for Treaty 6 and 7, Region 3 and 4, the Métis Nations of Alberta. These lands are the home of the diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant communities today. Now, in keeping with a tradition of gathering, these science seminars provide an opportunity for us to gather together to exchange knowledge on interesting science happening across Alberta in an open and learning sharing environment. The hope is that through our dialogue today, we are all able to improve our awareness and understanding and put this knowledge into practice to support evidence-informed decision-making wherever that occurs. So today, to help maintain our call quality, your video and audio have been disabled. Again, we encourage you to enter any questions or comments you have at any time during or after the presentation via the Teams chat function. I will read out the questions and comments in the order that they have been received. Today, we welcome Dr. Phil McLoughlin. Phil is a professor in the Department of Biology at the University of Saskatchewan. His primary research interests lie in the conservation and management of large mammals, principally ungulates like caribou, moose, and feral horses, and their predators, including wolves and bears. As part of his work, in 2007, he founded a continuing long-term research program on the ecology and evolution of feral horses on Sable Island, Nova Scotia. Along with his PhD student, Paul Boyce, who recently defended, and collaborators at the University of Calgary, Phil has been working on the ecology and management of feral horses in Alberta since 2018. Over to you, Phil.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just quickly share my screen here. Okay, so today I'll give you a seminar here on kind of what we've been up to at the University of Saskatchewan in collaboration with colleagues at the University of Calgary and other folks with respect to new research on feral horses in the Alberta foothills. I'll begin with a bit of a background, not just into the program, but also to myself and my own research interests in feral horses. And then we'll speak about some of the work that we were able to accomplish over the last few years, along with my PhD student, Paul Boyce, who I'll introduce in a second, and by photograph, and then spend some time talking about some of the, I would say, the wider implications of our work and the horses in the foothills system as I see it. So our sorry, I have so many people to thank for this work, starting, of course, with my lab here. You'll see Paul Boyce, who's the PhD student for much of the program here. He's kind of in the back there with the balding head. I don't know if he's online right now, but we have many students that have contributed to field work in the Alberta system here, program of ours. Including a number of undergraduates, which I can't name, helping to sort out through camera trap photos. I also have another colleague here, my comrade in arms. This is Jocelyn Poisson at University of Calgary, who's been really instrumental in helping to guide my own research interests and promoting our work across Canada on feral horses. And I'll have a bunch of other acknowledgments at the end. So, how do I come by my research program on feral horses? I would say, um, myself, I kind of class myself as a population ecologist, and I work on a number of different systems. Uh, caribou, wolves, bears, what have you, and then also feral horses. And I came to work on feral horses initially by launching a study in Sable Island. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the Sable Island study, but it is something of relevance, if anything, because I had learned so much from that system about feral horses and how it might then translate into the Alberta system and help us understand some of the issues that are involved with feral horses, their ecology, and then also their management. So, just very quickly here, my introduction to working on feral horses was when I was initially looking for a population of large ungulates to establish a long-term individual-based population study. And so I'm not really a horse person myself. I don't know how to ride a horse. I don't keep horses or anything like that, but I do find them fascinating and as an interesting ungulate species for a number of reasons. And trying to understand how populations work and wild populations work is very useful to be able to keep track of individuals, uh, of every um, component of the population. So you can ask some really neat questions around, why do some lineages flourish and others go extinct? Anyways, we started this population study on Sable Island around on feral horses in 2007, and we have this. I think it's like the world's largest study now for feral horses in an individual-based study. We've learned a lot. We've learned a lot about the ecology of this species, the evolution of this species, and some interesting things. Like you look at the population dynamics of feral horses in this system, it really is a boom and a bust cycle, but you also notice, and this data actually goes back to the 1800s, you'll see this very clear trend of an increase in carrying capacity from the 1960s and 70s through to today. And if you're dealing with a primary consumer like a feral horse, an ungulate, you start to think about, okay, what has changed in the system from a bottom up point of view perspective. And what has changed with the habitat? And there's a lot of hypotheses about this. You can talk about climate change, but ultimately, we're thinking that there's a change in the productivity of the landscape for horses. And when you delve further into this system, horses aren't the only species on this island that, and the relationships that we've started to learn between seals and horses is quite informative when we start to talk about the place of horses in a food web. And so we have this very strong signal now of gray seals fertilizing the landscape on Sable Island to then influence the habitat selection of horses, influence their population dynamics. Not all that dissimilar from where we have perhaps wolves being reintroduced to places like Yellowstone National Park to influence the behavior and the population dynamics of elk in this case. So I've the more I get into the Sable Island project, the more I start to think about these uh, food web type questions and the role of other species, trophic cascades, influencing the abundance and the behavior of horses, and where does that horse fit into an ecosystem? On Sable Island, they're a naturalized component of the wildlife. I think they're actually called naturalized wildlife. Wherever you find feral horses today, they also are playing an ecological role, and it just like any ecological role in a food web, it's going to be governed by the dynamics of habitat and species around it. And in the case of Sable Island horses, we also have um, a role to be played by humans in a way people might not think so much, but really, you look at why we have so many seals today coming onto the island, transporting nitrogen to then be, affect the horse dynamics. It's because we think of the collapse of the cod fishery back in the 1960s that led to an abundance of smaller fish and shellfish that the gray seals have been able to capitalize on. So now we have 400,000 gray seals pupping on Sable Island today, whereas maybe 10,000 back in the 60s, and the horses have responded to that. So this idea of the horse being a part of an ecosystem, it's I I think it's something that really hasn't been appreciated when you look at the dialogue around feral horses, which has largely been dominated by um, management concerns, really applied research. But the reality is that horses are connected to these systems where they're found. They are playing an ecological role, and we don't really understand this very well. We have a pretty good job when we start to talk about other species. Like here, we go to Alberta, we go to Banff National Park, we look at how elk and beaver and wolves might be interacting in a food web. We don't have a very good appreciation for what is going on with horses, um, for a number of reasons, and that's kind of framing our study here. So I'm going to leave Sable Island horses right now, and I'm going to jump to Alberta, topic of this talk. And but I but I, horses are horses, okay? There are so many parallels wherever you find them on the landscape. So we know um, a lot about the horse because it is this high profile species that humans really care about. I mean, all of the horses, Sable Island, you know, feral horse in Alberta, they all kind of came from the same domestic stock. We have a really good understanding of the genome of the horse. We know, for example, there's a recent paper with a colleague of ours, Ludovic Orlando, showing that, it was around 2,000 years ago, we had all of our domestic stock kind of replaced the started to replace the wild stock. So they're all kind of from the same place, but they also share a number of similarities. These are large herbivores, uh, high-cheeked, um, monogastric fermenting organisms. They are they're not like the cervids we might be used to talking about in Alberta, caribou, elk, deer. They're very different in terms of physiology, morphology, social system is quite different. There's no sexual dimorphism, okay, which has some really important implications for population dynamics. Traditionally, we think of a polygynous species like the horse as um, population size increases. There's pressure put on females and cost of reproduction, but there's even greater pressures put on males, which might have larger body size. You look at, say, elk, for example. So that as population size increases, the sex ratio shifts towards females. And there's implications there when you're trying to study these species that, well, really we only need to look at, say, the females component of the population because it's their dynamics that are going to govern population growth. It's not the same with horses. Horses have no sexual dimorphism. Okay. And what we see on Sable Island and a few other systems is that as population size increases, it's the females and their cost of reproduction. They have this monstrous, I shouldn't say monstrous, but this impressive gestation period. We're looking at 11 months, right? It's they're and then they go into full heat, and then they all of a sudden are pregnant again. The females are pregnant all the time. Um, you've got this real cost of reproduction that the females bear, and then the males. Yeah, they fight and they have to support, they have to defend their harems, but the costs at high density are not the same. And so you can end up with some very biased sex ratios, and the role of the male in the population dynamics can be quite important. So things are different. Of course, horses also have this really long relationship going back 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years depending on who you talk to, with people. And so they aren't wildlife, even if they're not treated as wildlife, even if they are functional equivalents of wildlife for where we find them. So the management um, background to horses uh, can be very different from working with other species. There's a biological asymmetry that we find with the other ungulates we're maybe used to managing, but there's also a social or a political asymmetry. Um, we have this very tight bond with horses, and so um, just use an example from Sable Island. I can brand a seal on Sable Island, but you think I can get a permit to biopsy dart a horse? It's very different. In fact, Sable Island is pretty much set up for the horses. There's this different dynamics of horses when it relates to people. When they're in the wild, um, you're not going to easily shoot a horse. Um, uh, whereas be quite culturally acceptable to shoot a deer or shoot a moose in the landscape. Um, we also have horses being managed by different entities compared to wildlife. Uh, they're managed under the Stray Animals Act in Alberta, um, not the Fish and Wildlife Act, uh, where they, in my view, they should be. Um, this leads to a number of different biases, how they're treated, how we can study them. It's very, very difficult in some places. I mean, our own experience in Alberta coming into the system was, quite frustrating at times. And I won't go into those details, but there is there's this it's a different dynamic compared to any other species, and it causes some problems, especially as it relates to our understanding of the basic ecology of feral horses as wildlife. um, Even where I can publish papers, believe it or not, it's difficult. Feral horses, these are animal people relationships. It's not the same as what you might expect for wildlife landscape relationships. So the journals you can publish in, it can become quite difficult. um, but they play this role. And it makes for very frustrating. I know that we're lagging in our understanding of feral horse research, and so this is kind of coming into Alberta. um, where my mind was at is trying to understand, okay, here we're coming off of Sable Island, and now we have predators and we have competitors. We have this very diverse system in terms of large mammals relative to Sable Island, which only has the horse and the seal as mammals. um, and maybe the odd bat. And so, how do horses fit into this system? And we know that there's predators to deal with, and our early work on with camera traps showed this to be quite true. We know that horses are, prey to large predators in our system. The system is also quite different. We have a boreal plains, foothills system there. Believe it or not, this is not a system in which the horse really evolved, or at least didn't persist. If you go back historically, and this might surprise people, but horses did live in North America. The most recent data is, up to or maybe around 5,000 years ago. You go to Yukon and Alaska, we saw the horse, which you can't really see in this graph here, persisting to around 5,000 years ago, along with the woolly mammoth, or the Columbian mammoth, and then they went extinct. But they were contemporaries with people. The thing that really happened to the horse in North America was a switch in habitat from open, kind of cold, temperate grasslands that were quite productive into a forest type system. So you can see the increase in the amount of you know spruce as a component of the plant biomass in North America at the end of the kind of the middle of the Holocene, and that's when the horses went extinct. The same thing kind of happened in Eurasia or in Europe, And this is an interesting paper which showed how the wild horse in Europe was really flourished only where there were open spaces, and you had a change in dynamics of habitat where it went into kind of there was some some steppe, and then the kind of the pre-boreal area, and then into a period of boreal landscape. And the interesting thing about this paper is that it proposes that why did the horses kind of come back before they were eliminated by in the wild by domestication. It had a lot, they believe, to do with the clearings that were created by Neolithic peoples into the modern day. So you look at the Alberta foothills. My point here is that the background, the boreal plains, as it exists, in a climax forest, that is not horse habitat. Okay, and there's lots of lines of evidence that this is true. The foreground is horse habitat, and so then you come to the modern Alberta landscape, and you'll note a couple of things that going back from our early work on out of the University of Alberta on horses to today, there's a lot of clearings here, and so there's much to think about as we led into our study, and we've kind of come up with some ideas on uh, what is happening right now with the feral horses, given the amount of anthropogenic landscape disturbance, given the asymmetries around feral horses and other wildlife. There was also I would say it's a dearth of information about this species in this landscape leading into our work. I mean, there was a really important thesis from the late 1970s with Bob Hudson and his PhD student, and then recently Tisa Gerard had some work. And of course, Alberta Environment and Parks, or you guys have a different name now, we're carrying out minimum counts. This is the Sundre equine zone where our focus of research was centered, and you can see that there has been a lot of there has been work in the past and through the the annual aerial surveys of horses in the region by the Alberta government. So there's some information there. Leading into our study, if we go to these minimum counts, this is kind of the picture right up to 2017. Uh, from relatively few animals back in the year 2000 to more and more animals, and this is just for the Sundre equine zone. Of course, there are horses in other equine zones as well. um, in the different colors off to the in the center of the graph there. um, but overall there's been an increase, and as we started our study we had this next uh, population count that was over 1,000 animals in Sundre, which really raised a lot of alarm bells about what is going on with the horses. And I've seen exponential growth before. We've seen it on Sable Island. We've seen it in other feral horse systems. Feral horses can reproduce at really fantastic rates, 20% per year kind of thing. And what is in store for Alberta was really framing our study. And then if any, are there any management actions that we might be able to take? Now, we had to revise some objectives, and I would say this is kind of our main objectives for the project, really to document how horses were responding to habitat, especially relative to other species in the environment. And these other species we're worried about elk, we're worried about thinking about cattle, we're thinking about deer, we're thinking about moose, we're thinking about predators. But that was really kind of coming in a little bit after the fact, understanding what is this ecological role of the horse in the system. We wanted to confirm these population trends. There's lots of questions around minimum count data and how useful they are, but also the population characteristics. Are they behaving like, the horses that I know on Sable Island, or are they maybe a little bit different? And then I think critically, identifying issues of management concern and shed light on this role, this ecological role that the horses are now playing in the Alberta foothills, whether you like it or not. Okay. And um, all of this kind of coming back from my background on food web dynamics on Sable Island. So I had a couple of predictions and some hunches. I was really fortunate to hire Paul Boyce as a PhD student to come into this project and work with Jocelyn Poisson on setting up this program uh, and work with a number of really great people to launch this uh, and groups as well. You know, the Wild Horse of Alberta Society were really critical to this program. Uh, so we had some predictions. We had some hunches. I'd say hunches. So predictions, you know, knowing what I know about horses in boreal environments and their need for open landscapes, their diet, their ability to feed on relatively poor forage in a high throughput manner. Um, I thought that these horses should be responding positively to the current environment and management conditions given all the asymmetries that are there. Okay, you're not going to shoot horses like you, or you're not going to hunt horses like you might moose. At the same time, uh, there's you know there are lots of reasons why horses should be increasing, and so I thought the horse population would be increasing. I thought the minimum count data is probably, you know, fitting here, but I didn't know how density dependence might operate in this system. Um, you know, it's different on an island where you're dealing with completely, you know, competition within the species. We have predators. I didn't really know anything, so there's not a lot I could make in terms of prediction of what we'd find, but I did have this hunch that the horse was playing this important um, if not dominant keystone role in the foothills ecosystem. And I say this because wherever we find horses in a natural landscape, they're pretty important. They're important to the species around them and the food web in which they find themselves. So we had lofty plans for this project. 2017 into 18, the plan was to put out 30 GPS collars, the largest GPS collaring project for feral horses in Canada, and that didn't happen. I mean, we ran into um, a number of roadblocks. I won't go into details, but we started out with corralling. People don't like us capturing horses, so the corrals are opened up at night. You know, we had to get the RCMP involved and things like this. We just didn't get any horses collared, so we had to um, uh, you know, colored the easy way, so we had to go the hard way, and this involved developing a new drug cocktail. Turns out horses aren't darted very often. They're mostly corralled and then equipped with collars, or yeah. So it was a lot of difficulties, and we ended up at the end of the day with getting only 5 kind of working collars on our out of our GPS plan. Um, you know, we learned a lot along the way. Practical things that we can be proud of today. What kind of cocktails of drugs to use? This is with Nigel Colquitt and Bruce Stover. Um, the different types of collars that work well on horses. This is a recent paper that kind of built on our earlier work. I think it switched out tyletamine with a component of BAM with butorphanol. And so this paper, there's work that has come out of this on our approach to collaring horses, but it is quite difficult. And it's not, I would say, I got more emails about collars on horses than anything. And um, yeah, so anyways, it's very challenging, I think, but we did get some data. We were able to confirm, you know, home range sizes were probably around the same as what Gerard found, you know, 50 to 100 square kilometers for these bands over the years. This is where we were able to get our home range sizes. We were able to do some, I would say, some analyses of resource selection with the collar data, which is kind of fortunate in that the horses were fairly strong selectors of habitat, and so that really bode well in the favor of detecting uh, selection where it occurred. Um, but we had to pivot our study and rely a lot more on non-invasive techniques, and so we put a lot of time and effort into developing a camera trap grid here to look at horse occupancy and relationships with other species. So we did a pilot work in 2017, and then we established another 100 cameras over the Sundre equine zone, or a large portion of it, through to 2019. We had to pull the cameras in 2020 for some funding issues that were related to our program. Um, Difficult to get money to study feral horses, I'll tell you that. But at the end of the day, we ended up with around 1 million images, and I mean, we had lots of attrition with our cameras. Lost due to theft and logging, things like this. But we ended up with around 850,000 images over a 3.5 year um, period. And of these, I'll just show you where our camera traps originally were set up. Right across the grid, we were able to learn quite a bit. We initially tried to do a spatially explicit, capture recapture analysis, going off of horses which have unique markings. At the end, our strongest data really came from the occupancy modeling. We learned lots of tools along the way, starting off with having undergraduates, classify something like maybe 20 undergrads working with 250,000 images. Took a half a year. In a matter of a week, we were able to do the same thing with Microsoft's Mega Detector AI algorithm. So we could use that to very rapidly identify, at least point us in the direction of our camera traps, whether this is an animal or not. So here's an animal is 100%, and then we classify it as a horse. There's a cow. There's a deer. There's a moose. Uh, there's a person. At least 95% probability that it's a person. Really, really useful uh, machine learning algorithm. Here's a few other people here. Are they on vehicles or not? We're able to learn a lot and classify a lot of images in a very short period of time, which yielded some pretty interesting data for the system. So it might not surprise you that the foothills of Alberta is now, I would say, largely a deer, horse, cow, ATV landscape. Um, if you look at the proportion of sites that we've on the right hand side of the graph here, proportion of sites that have been had hits of horses, they were quite almost as widely distributed as deer. They were the second most widely distributed species. But then you look at the total number of events, you'll see that really there's lots of hits of people on ATVs. You'll have some on foot, uh, and the really it's deer and it's horses and it's ATVs, and cattle. Of course, cattle are only there present only part of the year. I'll show you a graph in a second. Some other interesting species, of course, you're finding wolves and cougars and grizzly bears, and but they're all relatively rare in comparison to horses. In the winter time, if you look at January here, you'll see that this is the animals aren't moving that much. That's why this is the captures per 100 days. Um, the region is dominated by horses on the cameras in the winter time, and that shifts into the summertime, where it's cattle are now present, and then you have horses and deer. um, the moose will also kind of show up, but it really is um, now this is a horse ATV deer um, cattle system, uh, which is certainly not what it was 100 years ago. I can tell you that. Uh, but it is what it is. We learned a lot. Okay, we were able to learn some of the basic biology of the horses. Nothing that really is stands out. Average band size, sex ratios, where we knew the sex of individuals in the bands. We were able to map using our detection models. The probability of horses being detected on our camera grid, map that out, and I think the minimum count data really kind of matched up well with that. We also learned a couple of things around the dynamics of the horse population a in a roundabout way. We did detect on our camera traps a uh, reduction in the number of foals appearing over time, and this kind of gave us a hint that there might be some issues related to recruitment in the population. Uh, when we look at the minimum count data that was being collected at the same time, um, remember we started this project here, just popping over 1,000, and then no data collected in 2020. There was a decline. Now, using our methods of estimating the abundance of horses, this is using what's called a space to event model. Um, we detected something very similar, and this kind of matched with our notions that um, there might be an issue with recruitment at the present time. Why that's the case? Anecdotally, from the people that I've talked to, the videos I've seen, um, there's probably a predation issue going on right now. Um, one of those 5 collared mares was actually killed, or actually grievously wounded, and then it was shot by people to uh, uh, possibly by a coup or a predator of some sort that was affected. I think the point here is that no population increases forever. Okay, density dependence can come in many different shapes. On Sable Island, it's related to parasitism and direct competition. Um, in the Alberta foothills, there's probably something going on with predation around calves, um, foals. And so this is interesting. I think this is telling us that the horses are fitting into this food web, and this raises all sorts of questions around what is their role? What is their role right now? What does this mean for the uh, management of horses going forward? We did work with resource selection and occupancy. Some of our key findings here was that there were some seasonal differences in how horses were used in the landscape, especially relative to what was originally perceived as their main competitor, cattle. So there might be some niche partitioning going on here. Um, our step selection functions and occupancy model suggested that horses are using cut blocks in the summertime and not the native kind of open rangeland where the cattle are. Now, once the cattle are gone, in its winter time, the horses move into these, or they use the rangeland more. They also avoid the deep coniferous forest. So this is just with the collars that we did have. These are the step selection functions. Just note that this is a distance to function. So in the summertime, uh, the cut blocks, distance to a cut block. So they're closer to cut blocks in the summertime compared to in the winter where they're farther from the cut blocks and are sorry in the summertime um, they're farther from the native rangeland. A few other things here you can see that they're pretty in the wintertime they're outside of the forest blocks. They're in the into the cut blocks. The comparison with cattle was interesting. When you look at how cattle were using cut blocks on our grid, we could see that it was quite a bit less than horses. So we mapped our occupancy, habitat suitability model in space, and you can see it's different in the summertime and the winter time. In the winter, they're using these native rangelands where they're available. In the summertime, it's the cut blocks that are available. So this kind of fits with what we were predicting, that the boreal forest as a whole is not good. Uh, coniferous stands are not good horse habitat. They need these open areas, and that has kind of been the story of the horse throughout the Holocene. Wherever we found the horse, they do better in uh, in areas that are open. And of course, this has some implications for uh, the understanding of horses in forestry or an industrial dominated landscape, that should be no surprise that horses can do quite well, especially when you bring, also think about the advantages that horses from a management perspective are afforded relative to other species on the landscape. If there's any lessons to learn here, I think certainly greater investment into ecological research is a real must, especially for horses. I mean, the horses are horses like other areas. A lot of work we need to do with the capture, to capture recapture analysis to cut down on the confidence intervals. uh, I think those minimum count data are probably making an okay reflection of what's going on with the population right now, and then some other things that I've just talked about related to that role of clearings and horses, and that there's some management, some relevance to horse management. So there we go. We've got the horse in this system, and there's one last thing I think I'm going to lead off here, and this is really where I think this work needs to go into the future, is understanding this system. The food web itself, accepting the horse as this naturalized lands organism, it's not. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I think the politics around managing the horse directly are very complicated. Um, I don't think immunocontraception. I think that window is closed on this. I don't know if it'll make any difference. Um, there is some important roles here to play in this, horse, cattle, deer, ATV landscape, uh, that might be surprising. So, I mean, if you look at the horse itself, um, we're used to talking about the horse again from a management perspective, as the livestock management perspective, an animal unit, which is what, 1,000 pound cow. Uh, that's what you kind of think of as livestock units. But really, if we think about it as a unit of ungulate biomass in the wild, we could think about how it might fit into a curve like this to support predators. So this is a recent paper by a friend of mine, Jerry Kuzik. We have our ungulate biomass units. We don't deal with animal units in terms of cattle units. A horse would probably fit in there, weighing around, maybe a little bit more or less than a moose. And when you think about the density estimates that we calculated for horses in the Sundre area, um, we're looking at somewheres around, on the shy side, where we are right now, zero 0.5 horses per kilometer squared. Multiply that with an ungulate biomass index of 6, you're talking about 3 um, uh, units per kilometer squared. Now, wolves, cougars, these obligate predators of ungulates, carnivores, enough here to support a healthy number of wolves. Um, and so I think this is something to really pay attention to into the future, is that role of indirect interactions uh, that the horse is now playing and mediating in the system, which is already modified quite a bit. Um, we know about things, concepts like apparent competition, especially from the caribou side of things, where I also work. Um, replace the moose here with feral horse and replace the caribou here with an elk. And in this graph, I think that could be a fair assessment. I don't think there's any hope of caribou coming back to Banff National Park with horses on its doorstep. There's lots of implications to think about. And I think that's when we start to look at the role of this horse in this system. This is my last slide. Is What are the things when it comes to managing the species that folks can agree on? Uh, Everyone cares about horse welfare. We have this tight relationship with the horse, so we don't want to see them, mauled by a cougar. And so if we see a wounded one, we'll shoot it. Um, we don't want to see them mistreated. Um, at the same time, we also don't want to see caribou never have a chance to, as horses kind of inch up on Jasper National Park. We don't want um, caribou to disappear from that system, or the Little Smoky Range. We don't want there are some real conservation concerns around that role that the horse is now playing. It's biomass that has been replaced. It's kilograms of meat on the landscape per kilometer squared that has replaced other species. Not just replaced, probably added to that, and it's going to have some implications for predator-prey dynamics, not just for this species, for other species. Um, Very, very fascinating problem. And I mean, there's lots that can be said about the horse, uh, but it definitely does. It is something that we brought to the system, and what we've done to the system has been favorable for the horse. And I think that's kind of where we are right now. So, lots of people to thank, lots of organizations. Thanks here to Alberta Conservation Association for being an early investor in our project. The Wild Horse of Alberta Society. We couldn't have launched this without the help there, and lots of thanks to Alberta Environment Protected Areas, different branches. Especially the Office of the Chief Scientist here. And I also have to thank Natural Sciences Engineering Research Council, my discovery grant from Sable Island that I had to use to fund the Alberta work. It all kind of fits together. So thanks, everyone. And that's my last slide.
Thanks everyone for joining the science seminar today. This was our last science seminar for 2022, and we will be back on January 31st, hosting Wes Olson, who will be presenting on the ecological buffalo. Hope you can join us for that. As a reminder, if you're not on our mailing list and would like to receive invites to our science seminars and would like to be added to it, or if you and your team have work that you would like to share at an upcoming science seminar, please contact the Office of the Chief Scientist at aep.ocs.gov.ab.ca. We'll end there for today. Thanks again, Phil, for sharing your work with us. It was really interesting. And to everyone who tuned in, we'll see you next time in the new year. Thanks so much.